are now live. We are back, episode 3 of the No Name podcast.
We really got to come up with a name, guys. It's 3 episodes already with some of the top people in crypto, and we don't even have a name for the show. But no, I'm super excited. Today we're joined by Armani Ferrante. He's a man that needs no introduction. He's one of these developers you'll only meet a few times in your lifetime. He can do things that most developers can't. He's also one of those guys that understands the community side as well as the product side, which I think is very rare. And yeah, without further ado, I'll pass it over to him.
Oh boy, that's quite the introduction. How's it going, guys?
Good. How are you, Armani?
Good. Am I supposed to be monologuing here?
I guess it's GN for you, right? The team recently moved.
It's 10 p.m. here, but yeah, we did recently move. We're here in Japan.
Awesome. You have everyone out there?
Not everybody, but we have a substantive part of the team packed up our bags and moved over here. Kind of have been bouncing all around the world for the past couple months and have finally have settled down here in Tokyo. So super excited to be here. It's an amazing place, honestly. If you've never been to Japan or Tokyo, I would highly recommend it. It's unlike anywhere else I've been. But yeah, it's awesome. Finally have a home base and sit down and do some work.
Awesome. Yeah, I know obviously everyone knows you initially from, initially before xNFT, right? But xNFT and Backpack kind of kicked off this recent trajectory that I feel like has really dominated a lot of crypto Twitter, especially from the Solana side for the last year or so. Most recently got the merch shipment out with the sweatshirts. There's been a lot of fun on projects for low quality apparel and merch in the past. I would say that this is the single best sweatshirt that I own.
Right? This is Carhartt. Really... This is super nice. You guys handed this to me. I was like, wow, this is amazing.
Yeah, nailing the merch.
I have one of those hoodies, one of the original xNFT ones. It's like 3 sizes too big. I still wear it proudly. I love it.
Absolutely. Yeah, I feel like the natural place to start, right? We can probably transition into xNFT and see really what's going on in the engine that is Backpack. But Mad Lads have really been like a hit kind of everywhere, kind of has spanned across all of crypto Twitter. I feel like sometimes things will get siloed into like the Solana community, Ethereum, etc. But Mad Lads seem to be one that has brought a lot of people together, right? Solana and Ethereum working together to create a better decentralized future is something that I know all 4 of us believe in. Yeah, would love to hear, right? It almost seems like Mad Lads has been a very cool kind of go-to-market product for Backpack, right? Getting people to come in and use the wallet. And it seems like that's probably the best use case for NFTs, right? Kind of bootstrapping an early community, having it as like a go-to-market strategy for a larger product and a larger vision. And I think you guys have pulled that off to a T. But yeah, would love to hear like some of the initial thoughts around like kind of how Mad Lads was born out of the Backpack team. And then what some of the thoughts were just around like how it could affect go-to-market, like how the community building is important for a wallet, and then like the larger picture, which is xNFTs. But yeah, if you could riff a bit on the thought process behind Mad Lads and kind of go from the initial stage to where we are now and what the community currently looks like.
Yeah, so I think there's a bunch of points to unpack. I think foundationally, and if you've heard my spaces or their podcast, you're probably sick of me saying this, but I think foundationally, crypto is this really incredible industry where you have the intersection of so many diverse fields, whether it's, scientists or engineers or artists or economists, community builders, company builders, open source advocates. It's this really incredible mix of things. But fundamentally, I think it's really the intersection of tech and culture. And this is kind of, seen by anybody that's been in crypto for any kind of substantial period of time. You have these like amazing communities that rally around these shared, I don't know, jointly owned assets, whether they're tokens or whether they're NFTs or brands or protocols or pieces of open source software. This is honestly like the most like magical part of crypto, and you see it in all the main ecosystems, right? Bitcoin has this incredibly, zealous and active community that you can't, you can't get it to do anything against its will. Ethereum's got like, I remember in 2017 when I first came into crypto, it was just like, I felt like, I don't even know how to describe it. I felt like I was like, went into like another universe. Cause like, I'd been living in San Francisco and was kind of working at Apple and was kind of in the normal kind of, I don't know how to describe it, I guess corporate kind of tech culture. Right. And Ethereum was like this really crazy, I don't know. It's just this, it really opened my eyes, I feel, in terms of like what was possible, but also like how other people were approaching, open source and tech and things like that. You had this like kind of ragtag group of folks, traveling around the world, going to conferences, giving talks, doing like, ad hoc research groups, working on all this incredible open source that was like basically anybody can join. And that was like a really magical thing. All these like really kind of, nerdy developer types from all these different countries. And, on Solana, obviously, as we're all pretty actively involved in, you've seen its own flavor of this type of community building. I would describe Solana as, somebody said on Twitter today, actually, it's like a little less academic. It's a little more product centric. There's a lot of companies, a lot of people that are doing traditional kind of funding, but it certainly has its own culture that's distinct from the other two. And, with Mad Lads, I mean, there's a bunch of motivating factors behind it, but this was maybe the foundational kind of, I don't know, view of the industry that, crypto is built on tight knit cultures that create this, magical and in some cases unbreakable social layer that is kind of needed for all of the kind of subsequent, technology that you might be building kind of on top of it. And so kind of with Mad Lads, it was kind of a multi kind of faceted approach, I guess. There's, on the one hand, this view of the world. On the other hand, we wanted to build products, right? And well, in order to build products, you kind of have to know your customer. And what better way to know your customer than to kind of be it, right? And so if we wanted to build NFT products, if we wanted to build a wallet, mind you, this was probably the most important thing that was happening in crypto at the time. It was just like this huge kind of NFT wave, or NFTs had kind of penetrated the mainstream culture. You had Eminem and Snoop Dogg and all these, crazy folks rocking Bored Apes. And it was really the first example, I think, beyond maybe Dogecoin and Bitcoin, of course, where it was a relatable product that normal people can get behind and understand and use, because everybody loves art, everybody loves culture, and in crypto, NFTs are kind of just the digital kind of manifestation of all of that. And so we decided, well, it makes a lot of sense for us to do an NFT project. And we took a look at a lot of the projects at the time, and we're studying them a bit, and we thought, well, all these folks can do it, we can probably do it. And we thought we could do a pretty good job of it. I think there's certainly like some creative bone and muscle, kind of both in myself and on the team. We love this type of stuff. And so, yeah, we kind of just thought it'd be a great idea. We can create this NFT community and help build the product kind of through it, right? Whether it's, you saw some of the early features with xNFTs, right? So random stuff that we were just trying out, like everything from like the xNFTs in the App Store to, messaging, to building like social stuff, to, the entire mint experience, which, if you went through the Mad Lads mints, there was a bunch of, everything from the whitelist to the mint itself was kind of like demonstrating some of these experiments and like kind of stuff that we were just throwing against the wall. we had everything from games that we built for the whitelist experience. So we had like, we were like one of the first crypto apps that were actually utilizing kind of like AI before like the whole GPT bomb went off to like, use DALL-E to, guess prompts for images right there in Backpack. And that's how you would get a whitelist, or you would guess like not AI generated, you would guess animal noises. So you'd hear like shrieking, like, pandas and crazy stuff like that. And it turns out if you have like, game that might seem trivial plus Discord channel, that was like a great combination. We found out, because people just like to hang out with each other and do stuff. And it doesn't really matter what that stuff is, as long as they're maybe solving some challenge or some problem together. In our case, it was animal noises and, AI generated images. We had like the Minecraft puzzle hunt where we hit a bunch of invite codes inside of this like huge cathedral. And we did all this stuff, right? We did the kind of like less product stuff as well. We did like, content competitions and all that stuff on Twitter. And, was really kind of developing product through it and exercising our community building muscles. But it was a very long process. It wasn't something we just like randomly did like over a weekend, overnight. Like, yeah, we're gonna do an NFT project. We had that Discord open for quite a long time, at least 6 months, maybe longer. And eventually, it culminated into the Mint experience, which was like this huge thing. And, I think maybe to close the loop on this, the Mint experience, we had this like, xNFT where, you minted a rug and oh, did I lose everyone?
No, you're so good.
I'm just playing around with different formats, trying to be fancy.
Camera, but
got it. Yeah. So yeah, we had this experience where you minted a rug, you click on the rug, you enter into this like battle with the Mad King, and then it was kind of like a World of Warcraft raid boss inside of an xNFT, and then once you do that, you find your rug and you unrug yourself to reveal the Mad Lad, right? So it's this like really this combination of like this creative storytelling and immersive experience, but all inside of the wallet and all using xNFTs. And we really used it as an opportunity to showcase like some of our ideas and stuff that we were building, right? It was this whole like storytelling process. And honestly, I feel like this is something that you don't see a lot of NFT projects do that they should be doing, which is, well, they should be using that. They shouldn't be using launch pads. I think launch pads, like, they're great businesses maybe for the NFT marketplaces, and not to like, rag on the NFT marketplaces at all. But mints are the best opportunity to showcase what you've done and why people should care about you. It's the best opportunity for storytelling. And so if you're not taking full advantage of that as an NFT project, you are just leaving so much value on the table. And anyway, we kind of, went into that kind of neck deep and did that whole experience. And so Mad Lads was really kind of, on the one hand, it was this community building exercise, but on the other hand, it was this product development exercise where we wanted to be our own customer. And that was like a great kind of, that was a great thing to do, I think. And it continues to be a great thing to do. And then I think like the way I see it in the future, like whenever we have these great experience or these great milestones, originally it was the extension in xNFTs, but with each milestone, assuming you have enough demand, it's a great opportunity to showcase what you built, do an NFT mint, acquire users, get a new kind of batch of demand into the product, and celebrate all of the hard work that you've done. And I think that's just a great way of doing things. And I think we'll probably continue to do that in the future. But I think it's subject to demand and, what the market looks like and, whether people actually are interested in getting, buying the artwork and things like that. We obviously wouldn't do anything like, overly like, dilutive or anything like that. We're very, very, very sensitive, especially after seeing like what a lot of other projects have done. So yeah, I think that was it. And then maybe there's this like third element to the thinking behind Mad Lads, which you're starting to see manifest right now, especially with things like the roster, which is, well, you might have heard this quote a million times. I think it was like Reid Hoffman or somebody said it, but like first time, entrepreneurs focus on product, second time entrepreneurs focus on distribution. And so I think if you take that view of the world, right, and in crypto, distribution is really a fickle thing. There's not really that many teams with tons of demand and distribution. But it turns out if you have that, it's worth a ton because crypto customers are just insanely valuable. And from this point of view, well, you could use NFT project or Mad Lads specifically as a distribution generating mechanism. And once you have that distribution, well, whatever you do with that is kind of up to you. And so what we've been doing is thinking, well, how do we build this brand, this decentralized brand, and make it, as big as any other brand in the world? If Nike can do it, or, Louis Vuitton can do it, or Red Bull can do it, like, I don't know, we can do it, right? Like, because it's like kind of, with crypto, you have this much more potent ability to get people to care about whatever it is that you want them to care about, whether it's a product or a coin or an NFT or whatever it is. And so what we're doing kind of with Mad Lads from this point of view is just, building cool stuff for the sake of doing cool stuff, and, I think the roster is like maybe the best example of this, where we are finding just incredible talent that we think has the ability to kind of like go big in their respective domains. So whether it's like professional surfers or, snowboarders, or, talent like Jakey doing kind of, other forms of content.
How'd that come about? Because I've seen Jake do the content. I've seen you sign up a surfer. You guys are going after some pretty cool people.
The Mad Lads tattoo by Jakey in that video was one of the craziest things I've ever seen. Like, I saw that and I was like, Mad Lads is a different level, right? Like, no one has that going right now. So
yeah, I think it took some time to get the team on board with this, but I think, like, I fundamentally think that TikTok and Instagram and all of these non-crypto platforms are just so important for NFTs in particular, and so underutilized. I mean, you're starting to see people kind of come around to this now. I think we were definitely one of the first teams that were just posting a lot, like every Saturday, posting an image in the office, posting random videos, like doing clips. And I think content is just like a great muscle to flex. And I think we're pretty new to it. We're definitely very new to it relative to like the rest of the world and the rest of Web2. But I think we're like decent at it relative to crypto companies. And I just think it's super important. It's a great form of marketing. It's tons of fun. And it's a great way to get distribution, especially for brands. And so for the roster, I think, we're definitely lucky in that Tristan has a lot of really great connections. He grew up in Hawaii. There's a lot of incredible talent out there. And so I think, he's starting to tap into that as well, which I think also is like pretty unique to us and our ability to like, find these types of folks and bring them in. But there's definitely more kind of where that's coming from. And so, yeah, I'm super excited about it. And I think it's kind of a unique direction to take the project in.
Yeah, I think the extreme surfers like definitely fit the like cultured brand that you guys are building too, right? So having that Hawaii connection to all the top guys. I want to go back to something that you hit on a few minutes ago, around the mint being like, that's the mint of your project is far and away like probably the largest attention grab that most NFT projects have, or everyone focused on one thing at one time. You hit that resonance frequency where at that point everyone is with it together. And to build on that, I remember Legend hosting that the Mad Lads Twitter Spaces that I ended up joining, which was unbelievable. It was like 10,000 plus people, I believe. Legend, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it was the single biggest space I've ever seen on crypto Twitter, Solana related, right? Outside of like maybe like Bitcoin versus Ethereum maxi debates. But yeah, I think grabbing that is something that a lot of projects really don't do, and is incredibly important. So like you guys having the foresight to see that and then build in all of the functionality to show off Backpack, such a smart like strategic play overall.
Yeah, and honestly, many people don't realize this, but some of the biggest projects in the space, including Bored Apes and Punks, minted under the radar. They were basically these random collections minted out. Punks couldn't even mint out. Like people, the developers were minting to themselves 10 punks at a time every few hours to check if the contract was working properly. And Bored Apes minted out not with a bang, but with a whimper. Like they literally just kind of minted out, and then it was just social consensus, pure social consensus afterwards, where people rallied around and said, look, these collections have provenance, or there's a particular set of conditions here that make this valuable, and we're going to rally around it. And I think really Mad Lads captivated the attention in a way that was insane. I mean, I was front and center. I did 2 5 or 6 hour Twitter spaces in a row the day of the supposed mint, where there was a giant amount of DDoS requests, and then we had to delay. But I, being at the epicenter of that, hosting those Twitter spaces, just feeling the energy was insane. That was truly felt like a Web 2 type of moment for me in terms of engagement. Didn't feel like Web 3. That felt like, I think of crypto Twitter as kind of like a planet, like inside the atmosphere, we're doing these crazy things. No one in the outside world really cares. So we're kind of just in our bubble. But that felt one of those moments where we escaped orbit and we were kind of like going into the unknown. Like there was like blasting out of the atmosphere, and the engagement was like non-linear too. It was like, 1,000 people, then it was 2,000, then it was 3,000. And eventually I was the Twitter spaces was gaining like hundreds of people per minute. It was just like the most insane, scalable like phenomena I've ever seen. And honestly, if we had kept running it, it probably would have gotten to 20 or 30,000. It was absolutely insane. But I think to Armani's point, too often people outsource things that are central to the experience, right? This is the first expression of what the team can do, and the design and the philosophy and the intentionality behind a project. And giving that away to another platform feels like either you don't understand the magnitude of a mint and what it can do for your brand, or you just don't have a long-term view and you're trying to minimize costs.
I would love, Armani, if you could give us some insight, right? I feel like to the average person who is maybe on crypto Twitter for like an hour a day or something, not like us, right? But like your general, crypto Twitter enthusiast, enjoyer. Solana is at like a very interesting point where you have like a few diehards, right? Who are like, obviously you have very smart teams that are building in the space. Solana, like a lot of attention is driven by token price, right? So like obviously Solana had a massive crash and has now bounced back. And I think your average person is probably looking at it as, there are always these ecosystems that spin up in a bull market and then kind of die away. And they're maybe looking at Solana as like a coin flip, right? Of like, there's some really good stuff going on here, but like, does Ethereum win this whole thing? And it's a flash in the pan. And I don't know. I think a lot of people that spend time to look into it, like Ansem, one classic example, who's just been bull posting Solana all day. But he's like, you have to do the deep dive and see what's going on here, right? There is a lot to be excited about, like especially in the near term future. But you have to be more plugged into the entire Solana ecosystem than the vast majority of people. So like, would love to just hear your take on like kind of what's going on behind the scenes. Like, what are those Knights of the Round Table meetings look like, where all the top Solana guys are chatting with each other about the state of, say, the ecosystem, and just like hearing your opinion on kind of where Solana sits at the moment would be pretty interesting.
It's funny to hear you put it in those terms. There's no like Solana Illuminati, where people are like sitting around and being like, all right, when should we, do X, Y, and Z? It's funny because I feel like Solana attracts the type of person where, I mean, from my point of view, Solana and Ethereum are very different, not just at the social layer, but also just from like a systems point of view. Like if you look at it from the perspective of like of an engineer, and so I think there's a lot of like zero sum competition that you see on crypto Twitter. But from a design point of view, the two systems cannot end up in a more different place. If you think about like the universe of like all blockchain designs, right? Like Ethereum's like on one corner and like Solana's on the other corner. It's like, and so they're a lot more complementary, I think, than people think. Most people aren't really looking at it from that point of view. They're just looking at it from the point of view of like, oh, do I buy this coin or this coin? And that's where kind of like a lot of the kind of absurd kind of conversations come from. And so I think for the people that really need kind of the things that Solana is really good at, high throughput, low latency, parallel execution, Solana just like makes a lot of sense. Like, yeah, that you should build that. Somebody should build it. If it's not Solana, somebody else should build it. And somebody should also build a minimal, data availability layer that, runs on, a Raspberry Pi and has a bunch of, beefier systems with maybe bespoke kind of runtimes on top that kind of talk and communicate through this like settlement layer, right? Both things should exist. And I think on Solana, it's funny because it's viewed as like this contrarian thing, but it's really not that contrarian. Just if you put on your dev hat and you're like, okay, like what do I need? And it's like, yeah, obviously you need this, right? It's like, yeah, obviously I want to write smart contracts in Rust. Like, yeah, that sounds great. Like I've been waiting for a job where I could write Rust, things like that. I've been waiting for somebody to like turn out the hardware requirements. It's like, yeah, of course you should utilize like bandwidth to like the maximum kind of extreme. And like, yes, you should like utilize all the cores on your machine. Like, duh. Like every other system's built this way. Like let's build it. Let's build a blockchain this way and use it, right? And so I think on Solana, a lot of like even through the crash, even when like FTX kind of went down and everybody was calling Solana a scam chain that was like, they're saying it's run by SBF or whatever. It's like, the FTX chain or whatever. It's just like, yeah, obviously that wasn't true, right? Because you just like look at the code, right? You can like see all the validators that are kind of working together, and you can see all the people that are building, and so I feel like a lot of that stuff is really easy to ignore if you're just like in it. And I think the same thing was true for Ethereum in 2019. Granted, I felt like in Ethereum in 2019 was actually more painful of a bear market from my point of view, because it wasn't really specific to Ethereum. It just I felt like in 2019 it wasn't obvious to me that like much of the industry would even like exist, and maybe that's just because I was like relatively young and green and stuff, but it felt very different versus the whole FTX crash was like, okay, this is a devastating event, obviously a horrible thing, but it didn't feel like the industry was going away. It felt like the industry had reached a point of no return. It felt like Solana maybe was at a crucible moment where one of two things kind of was going to happen to Solana at that point in time. It would either, collapse under the pressure, all the devs would leave and the people would sell their tokens and stop, exit and go back to Facebook or go to another blockchain or whatever, or it would, forge its soul and transcend into a tier of blockchains that basically only two other projects can lay claim to, right? Bitcoin and Ethereum. That's it. And I feel like the latter basically happened, right? Where Solana has basically become this unkillable force in the blockchain kind of wars, so to speak. And so I feel like that's kind of more or less kind of how I viewed that whole situation. I think the reason why it was able to get through that moment was, it had a great social layer, but it's really rooted in sound engineering. I feel that's like basically what it comes down to. It's the same reason why people love Ethereum, right? It's like they know that there's been a lot of thought behind the design space and the trade-offs that those guys have made, and they're doing it all in public and they're doing it right. And I feel like a lot of people have that same confidence in the Solana engineering. not only because of like the work Solana Labs has done, but also because of the work that, for example, Jump and the Fire Dancer team is doing. Like, that's incredible stuff. Like, if you want to talk about Giga Chads, those guys are like the probably the biggest Giga Chads in all of the entire industry, honestly. Like, you look at that code and it's just like it's kind of gnarly.
I think two points on that. I would be remiss if we didn't shout out our newest show sponsor on This Way with Parallel Execution, doing, et cetera. You can go dive into the Twitter if you want to learn more about it. Second, I think Fire Dancer is something that, again, your average crypto Twitter enjoyer has probably seen, because the very smart people who create a lot of the cool things that are being built on Solana talk about, but generally don't understand really anything about what's going on with Fire Dancer. And there hasn't been kind of that like 280 character breakdown that like lets everyone kind of understand. I think I saw someone tweet yesterday. They're like, why didn't you name this upgrade or something Solana 2.0, right? Like jumping on the Ethereum side. And then someone replied like, well, I'm pretty sure Fire Dancer, we should just name Solana 2.0. So I think it's getting a lot of hype. If you could simplify a bit of what Fire Dancer, or even just talk about like what it enables, right? If you don't want to dive into like what's actually being built on the tech side, but just like what, say Fire Dancer was completed and implemented, like what does that look like from the user standpoint, and then from like the builder? Yeah, any of like the main overview characteristics would be awesome to run through.
Yeah, it's funny. It's no coincidence that Monad, your sponsor, the founder Keone, is from Jump as well. Monad seems like a pretty awesome project. Also doing the things that, like, yeah, somebody should be doing that stuff. People should. I don't know exactly how they're building, and I think it does like optimistic, pipelined transaction execution. And so I think that's like a good example of like kind of blockchain architecture. This makes a lot of sense. I'm really happy that he's working on it. But the TLDR for Fire Dancer is, how do we say this in a way that it makes sense to people? I mean, the TLDR is that it will, most people that write software do it very inefficiently. Fire Dancer will be very efficient. A simple example of this, just to put it in and put numbers on it. If you take a look at the Rust, the Rust crate for ED25519 signature verification, this is the elliptic curve that Solana and other blockchains use to sign transactions. It's like how they do the asymmetric cryptography, and Rust is like a pretty fast programming language. It's like probably, it's you do a lot of high performance stuff, but you basically can get 30,000 transaction or signature verifications per second per core. That's the number that you get with Rust out of the box. What the Fire Dancer team said is like, well, that's too slow. That's way too slow. So what they did was they rewrote that crate, but they did it on FPGAs. For those that don't know, FPGAs is basically programmable hardware. It's like a programming language. It's like a little DSL where you can write circuits, things like Verilog, etc. And you can run that code on a FPGA, which is basically programmable hardware, and bypass all of the complexity and inefficiencies of using operating systems and general purpose CPUs, and just really optimize down at the circuit level with your custom programmable hardware. So they rewrote this on FPGAs. And instead of getting 30,000 transactions per second per core, they get 1 million, right? So you have several orders of magnitude increases. So it's not some insane scientific breakthrough. I think a lot of folks think about kind of blockchains from these like research perspectives. It's really just, well, we have like really good tech. Let's just like optimize it to the extreme, right? You have arguably the world's best high performance computing engineers tackling the blockchain problem. That's basically what it comes down to. And it's not just ED 25519 signature verification. It's also like, things like just the general kind of how they just like utilize, the machine, right? The entire architecture of FireDancer is rewritten from scratch to be able to, properly utilize, the term is like mechanical sympathy, I suppose, like, the memory hierarchy and of your machine, right? It's like, people that know how computers work rewrite the software. So it basically comes down to just optimizing the hell out of the validator client and make the blockchain go fast. That's kind of it.
I think what's most amazing, honestly, is also the fact that there's going to be a second validator client that's able to help decentralize the network, right? Because Ethereum, is the only other chain with more than one. I think they have like 4 or 5 at this point. But something that's plagued Solana has been reliability and uptime or downtime issues. So really having the second validator client will be massive from the jump, but then those performance upgrades are going to be insane. I was looking at the presentation, and I think this is a level of performance that is borders on Web 2 already, but you're bringing all the magic of composability and smart contracts and interoperability and all these things in as well. So it's honestly insane. And I think throughout tech, there's these big transition moments like a step function where you go from dial-up to broadband and broadband to fiber optic. And every time you make one of those jumps, engineers can build way cooler things, right? Like you couldn't build YouTube on dial-up. You couldn't do low latency gaming or high fidelity streaming and 4K on broadband, right? And I think the sandbox gets bigger every time there's a jump, and engineers, I'm only just it boggles my mind what people are going to build once one of these blockchains can do 200,000-300,000 true TPS. Like, what kind of applications can you build with that? And I think no one really knows, but it's incredibly exciting. And it reminds me almost what you were saying, Armani, about there's a video game in the 1990s called Roller Coaster Tycoon. I don't know if you ever played it.
Yeah.
The guy
written in assembly.
He wrote it in assembly. And I thought that was super cool and kind of like related to what you were talking about.
To build on your point, Legend, there's this book called Metaverse by Matthew Ball, a term that has kind of fallen out of the popular vernacular recently. In my opinion, probably comes back in. But one of the main things that he talks about is people not really understanding what is actually enabling these things to be built, right? Like an idea comes up in like 2008 or something for an internet company, and someone's like, how did no one think of this before? And his entire argument is, it's not that no one thought of it before, it wasn't possible before, right? Like you need all of these hardware upgrades, and like you need the piping to be much, much stronger to support these types of things. And like the main point that he makes in Metaverse is basically like, you can't have 1,000 people all in close combat in like one map of a game with a lot of high graphics, not because no one can imagine it being built, but because the hardware isn't there to support it. And one of the main cases he makes is that like you follow Moore's law, right? Like hardware gets much better. Eventually that will be enabled, and then the apps will be killer that come from it. Which I think is like a pretty, like I think of Solana in a very similar way, right? FireDancer, I'd like abstract all of the actual tech background away from the user side, right? Can I get 1,000 people on the map? You're going to be able to do a lot more things with crypto that resemble that, right? If you think about like 2017 Ethereum, like people buying crypto kitties and like gas is like crazy high. That was the most that we could do. The tech was maxed out. But as you add efficiencies to the overall system, then the apps that you can create, right? I think of like StepN as like, I guess not RIP. I don't want to like hate on StepN, but like kind of RIP, right? But that was a massive wave. And the reason that it hadn't been built before was because it couldn't have been built before. And Solana enabled that, right? And I think we're going to see a lot more apps that follow similar trajectory, right? Like I think gaming is something that, or at least like low latency, like a lot of transactions going back and forth gaming was not possible. But you can see the vision of how it makes sense. It's just waiting until the actual tech can support it. And then you need the distribution, right? As you said earlier, Armani. V2 with high distribution on gaming should be cool. But yeah, I think that's like most people don't realize that the hardware enabling is like the main variable in a lot of these apps being built out.
It's massive. And honestly, I had a question for Armani around there's kind of this age-old debate on, I guess in Silicon Valley or tech where basically a lot of people argue infrastructure comes first and then products. Other people argue products and applications kind of like set the path and then the infrastructure catches up. What's your take on that?
Oh, yeah, that's a great question. I think it depends. I think in the case of the internet, I suppose actually I was going to make the argument that that you have salient examples of both cases, but even the case of the internet was like driven by like pretty concrete examples, like peer review articles and sharing that stuff. I think for most people, it's the product that drives the infrastructure, I think, because a lot of these ambitious infrastructure projects need a lot of time and a lot of money, and motivating use cases to like properly design them. I think great examples of this are a lot of like the modern database systems that came out of Google and Amazon, like a lot of those systems. Like if you go and read those research papers, like Bigtable, for example, Bigtable, DynamoDB, these things. Some of the first like Elastic NoSQL database systems that allowed you to get to web scale, right? Before that was a thing, right? Basically we had like this transactional, like Postgres, like MySQL type databases with very strong kind of what are known as ACID semantics in the database world. And then you had, these huge kind of companies that came out of the early days of the internet that really pushed the boundaries of what their databases can do. And so they were kind of required to reimagine a lot of this stuff. And if you go and read the research paper, it explicitly says, I forget which one, I think it was probably like Bigtable, that like this paper was not like a first principle like thing. It came out of existing code and infrastructure that Google had built to support the search engine. And I thought that was a very interesting thing to read, and is something that has very much informed my view of this conversation. In the case of Amazon, they built the bookstore first, right? There wasn't like, I'm going to build AWS first. They built the bookstore first, and then in order to build the bookstore and to get to that scale, they had to build all the infrastructure for AWS. And then they realized, well, if it's useful for us, it's probably useful for other people as well. So let's generalize it and provide it as a business, and the rest is kind of history. And I think those are two pretty darn good salient examples. I think oh yeah, go for it.
I was just going to add one example that's it hasn't played out yet, but we're seeing it play out in real time. I think Meta, like for better or worse, right? Like they see kind of the AR and VR space as like, if the tech can enable it, there is an insane amount of product market fit and kind of like human to tech interface changes that will like fundamentally shift society. They're like, I know that it's going this way. It can't be built yet, right? Like currently we have these massive headsets and like they stink. The UX is terrible. But once you put it on, it's pretty good. And like Zuck, but hate him or love him, he was explaining like their path to trying to get to like their end state product. And he talks about how like you basically want to build from two sides and have them come and converge, right? And one side is taking the hardware that people want to wear, right? So the glasses, and seeing how much you can enable from that side. And then taking like the massive headset with the full experience and trying to shrink down the hardware there. And basically you work at it from both sides, and eventually, hopefully 2-3 years from now, you get to a point where the hardware is exactly what you need. So I think it's like both things working in tandem, right? Is like, we know that this will have a massive amount of product market fit and hopefully be like very important. And like potentially the next big kind of user tech upgrade that exists. So they have that goal in mind and think that it'll be very important. And then they're building out the infrastructure to get there, right? Because it doesn't exist yet. So I don't know, excited to see how that plays out in real time. Like, I'm pretty bullish on it in general. I don't want to push my bias too hard, but like, I think that that's a really good example of infrastructure and kind of the drives of what people actually want to buy, like true product market fit, working in tandem to get to a point where the tech enables the user experience.
I would love to have an open source headset where I could interact with xNFTs. Like, think about tokenized applications airdropped into your headset. Like, for me, that seems like such a no-brainer. I was chatting actually with a guy who works closely with NVIDIA. He actually has like product keys and API keys that most people don't have. He's personal friends with Jensen. But he was telling me that the biggest thing is the glasses need to be small and comfortable, and then like the module that actually powers them in terms of compute needs to be like upgradable, and it needs to probably sit on your like on your hip or something. It can't be like tethered to the wall, or else you can just use a PC. So yeah, he was actually going through a lot of those like design questions and debates that you're talking about, Kevin. But I think also it's just a question of time, right? The compute is not there where I think you need 8K at 130 frames for it to be lifelike. We just haven't got there yet in terms of compute, and it hasn't been condensed into the glasses format yet. But the beauty of this, kind of what you were talking about, Armani, is that like, bandwidth is doubling every 2 years, or the cost is halving or whatever, and compute with multi-core performance is also doubling every X number of years, right? So it's not a question of like if we get there, it's when. And I think that's what's most interesting for me looking at the space. But I had a question around, app and product design philosophy. I know you spent some time at Apple, and Apple, of course, is famous for building a lot of stuff themselves. They didn't outsource the calendar app, right? They didn't outsource the calculator app or iMessage. They kind of just said, look, let's build it ourselves, and let's have a very robust and cohesive experience where we control everything. And once we have that like rock solid foundation, then we can open this up as a multi-sided platform with iOS. And I think that business model is extremely proven. I mean, just the other day, Apple, their market value surpassed like the 300 largest companies in the UK, which is like their S&P 500, which is insane to just think about, that one company is basically larger than the entire UK stock market. But having worked there and then looking at crypto apps like STEPN that had a very self-enclosed system, they had a DEX, they had a marketplace, they had a wallet, they had an on-ramp, they had like all these different things. How do you feel about like crypto apps, building like very isolated niche experiences versus like self-enclosed super apps?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think it's this weird catch-22, because especially venture-funded startups want to grow as big as humanly possible. And so they start with a niche, they grow, they win that niche, and then they're like, all right, how do I keep growing? Right. And they just keep doing this over and over and over again. Right. So with STEPN, they're like, okay, well, they built this, a walking app or whatever. They're like, great, we have the walking app, we have a token, we have the NFTs. Like, why are we using somebody else's DEX? Let's just make our own DEX. Right. And so they take over the DEX, then they become like number one DEX overnight or whatever. And then, then they keep having this conversation. But the problem with this and crypto is that crypto is so network driven. And so if you kill off one of the, members of the network, right, then there might not be a network anymore, right? It's like, you can imagine if like Magic Eden wanted to like create a DEX or something, right? It's like they started competing with like Phoenix or whatever, and they did like, that might look a little strange, right? It might not make any sense for like the Solana ecosystem. You might have a less vibrant eco. And so it's this weird kind of catch-22. And I think it depends on what you're building. I think this mostly applies to protocols and smart contracts, where I think ultimately the most sustainable things in crypto are things with the largest incentivized group of people that are using them. So in the case of smart contracts like a DEX, it's not just about building a great app, although that's a super important part. But it's also about getting other people to care about it. And so that's why like tokens are so interesting, right? This kind of shared ownership over a given piece of open source software, where in theory, the people that contribute value to that network are getting paid out proportionally, pro rata to the value that they're contributing. And if you have that mechanism, then you have a sustainable value creating system. Now in practice, you don't see this really happen much at all. You could argue it happens in L1s, but L1s are probably the best examples of it. But it's hard to do tokenomics, and it's hard to create mining systems, and usually there's some issue with the way it's designed, whether it's too large of a VC allocation or a bug in the software, or just you got a hyperparameter wrong, and that creates some weird incentive that you couldn't have foreseen. So I think, maybe to circle back to the question, like it just, I guess, at least right now, I don't think we've seen any good examples other than centralized exchanges be able to like dominate an entire kind of, I actually would argue centralized exchanges don't do this either. Centralized exchanges very much stay in their lane, so to speak, right? They're kind of like venturing into the wallet space and things like that, like but that just makes sense, right? They're not like, I guess Coinbase is doing like Base, and that is maybe a little, it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. Might not be great from a decentralization point of view, which is probably like maybe a super important consideration that might not be communicated much at all, which is to say that if it's not decentralized, then there's like what's the point? That's not to say exchanges should be decentralized, but like, Base certainly, like L2 certainly, L1 certainly. And so it is this kind of question where you want to grow, but maybe you don't want to grow too much and hurt that kind of argument. But yeah, I don't know. That's my long-winded ramble.
Yeah, no, it's insane, like your level of thought with this stuff down to like the hardware and computer level. When we ask you a question about like product or applications, you go extremely deep. And I think it's very clear to folks, even the non-technical people looking from the outside, that the level of like thought that goes into each of these decisions for you is like very, very much looking at the entire stack and drawing from your knowledge as a coder, right? And these considerations are extremely nuanced. And I think even just talking about the exchange business, it's extremely interesting to see how things are playing out. I think some degree of like backwards or forwards vertical integration makes a ton of sense for these chains and for these exchanges with their kind of layer twos, but it's all just experimentation. There's no like set in stone best way of doing things. People are just trying different stuff and seeing what sticks. But what's pretty clear is that the crypto user is extremely valuable per capita. It's the most valuable user in the world by far. I mean, you have companies with 10 billion plus valuation and a few 100,000 monthly active users, which has never happened in the history of tech before. And I think, people are just waking up to this, and there hasn't even been a gold rush of like data and analytics either, which is really, when you remember back to Web 2, this is what kickstarted a lot of like the bull run for tech, is when people could do, data and analytics and look at, hey, I spend this amount and this is a quantifiable benefit that I get for marketing on Google or for running ads on YouTube or whatever. And when they could quantify that impact, that's when the advertising exploded on the internet, right? And to this day, a lot of the money made on the internet is from advertisements. Unbelievably, like, we haven't changed that much. But I think, without rambling too much, it's an incredibly exciting time. And I think, and just in speaking with you, Armani, what really comes through is like your level of like the depth of thought is insane compared to, I talk to a lot of other founders. They are not nearly as nuanced and as kind of like full send in these answers as you.
One thing that came to my mind as you were speaking, that was maybe going back to the previous topic, just to go a little deeper. Upon reflection, perhaps the most exciting thing about Base, and perhaps the correct thing about Base, is that you have this incredibly capitalized behemoth in Coinbase that is investing into its ecosystem and its industry, by Kevin, where they're now no longer kind of sitting on the sidelines and just like operating an exchange. They're also just like investing manpower and resources into the decentralized world and the more crypto native part of things. And I think that's a really cool thing to see. And so I really love it from that point of view, where, well, how can you argue with their millions of users, right? That's great for the industry. And if they're going to throw in like, millions of dollars investing engineering resources into these L2s, I think that's a win for sure. And so I think that's like another maybe salient point that's worth pointing out. And honestly, a credit to Coinbase for having the foresight and desire to invest into the industry, rather than they can just sit on their hands and just, be a profitable exchange and do nothing. But I think it's pretty cool to see them do this as well. So anyway, sorry for rambling.
Legend and I are going to the Stanford Blockchain Conference, and I'm going to be sitting down with one of the kind of like core technical leads of Base and do like a deep dive of their technical stack. So super excited for that.
Yeah, that'll be exciting. I'd be curious to listen to that.
Me too.
We're honestly surprised sometimes. Logan and I wouldn't say which bank, but we talked to a major US bank or someone who worked there and ran payments. And they basically told us there's the division of like tens of thousands of people at this particular institution that are doing payments and settlement for banking. And that with the right blockchain, a permissioned blockchain most likely, they can reduce headcount by tens of thousands of people. And I don't want to sound insensitive. I think it's just like a natural progression of things, but it is quite insane to think, some of the largest companies where we know, Amazon, Google, others are building their own blockchains. And I think once one of them does this and people see the unlock and what it can do for just internally even, right? This is going to be something that's going to be very, very commonplace. And I think that day hasn't come yet, but very quickly, I mean, even governments and others will be adopting these things. So it's an incredibly exciting time, but just wanted to pivot back to Backpack and Mad Lads to close this one out. I think, a lot of people look at what you guys have been able to accomplish in such a short amount of time. It's only been not even 5 months. It feels like a year or 2 years that you guys have been shipping so much and made so much waves on social media. But kind of what for folks that are holding their Mad Lads and using Backpack every day, what can you guys kind of share, or what kind of philosophy is guiding the next 6 to 12 months for Backpack. You guys have arguably conquered the NFT space in a major way. You did more volume than Bored Apes and Punks for weeks on end. You've built a tier 1 wallet that's amazing to use. It has fantastic like innovations. Kind of what's next?
Yeah, so I'm gonna give I'll give an appropriate answer, but it'll be an incomplete answer for reasons that all three of us understand. So I think there's a couple components to the way that we're thinking about the next kind of 3 months. So very tangibly, we've moved to Asia, we moved to Japan. I've been bouncing around Asia for the past couple months. It's a very exciting section of the crypto industry. I think we very much have, especially in the Solana world, have had very Western focus. And so I'm excited to just honestly get more exposure to folks on this side of the world. It's a very different culture, but there's a lot of incredible people and a lot of stuff to share and a lot of stuff to learn from people. So just generally excited about being here in Asia. The second thing is, I think on the Mad Lad side, just branding and distribution in non-crypto ways. I think I'm very, very excited about that. We don't know where it's going to end up, but I think it's going to be a fun experiment. If nothing else, we'll have a bunch of cool videos with really incredible people, cool athletes, cool artists. We've got a couple really just insanely talented people that I'm super excited to share with the world. I think over the next couple months, and then I guess the third thing is keeping in mind where we are in the cycle. We're at the depths of the bear. And I was talking about this on the stream this week. I really just view right now as the time to hunker down and focus on taking moonshots, investing in big things, because there's not much going on in the industry right now. There's no reason to, rush things out to market. There's no reason to do a bunch of hype and marketing. There's no reason to even invest in short-term projects. Right now is the time. I mean, I think it was Mark Andreessen, the time to build, right? But that's so true right now. Right now is the time to focus on multi-year long projects. Now is the time to to go big, basically. And the analogy that I like to give, or that I gave over the weekend, was during COVID. I don't know if you noticed, but during COVID, a lot of very smart, companies or buildings basically did this, right? I'm thinking of a school kind of close by where I live, and I noticed it's a school that's been there for just my entire life, basically. But in COVID, they tore down the entire school. It's gone, to rebuild it, because everybody was working from home, nobody was going into school, so they took that opportunity to upgrade the entire school, basically. And that's basically, I think, how I'm thinking about things right now. It's, let's not optimize for the next week or the next month or next quarter. Let's really optimize for the next year, or even longer than that. And because that's when things will start picking up. And so we're very much investing in a lot of really hard work, a little quieter than one might expect, but I think it's for good reason, and hopefully it makes sense.
I think the long-term thinking generally wins than the short-term mindset. And unfortunately in crypto, with the crazy bull markets and terrible bear markets, it's easy to get caught up in the short term. And so, as always, it's, I think, just super refreshing to hear from you, Armani, and just how long-term you actually think about these things. I think that is the type of leadership and vision that's really going to pull us out of these bear markets, and really building products not for the couple millions that are really on chain today, but the hundreds of millions and billions of people that will ultimately interact with crypto, and all the unique promises that I think us three on this stage believe the crypto markets will ultimately enable. It's just now taking that to the masses.
Yeah, I think one last thing, that reminded me of was yesterday. Buffalo from Jito Labs said, a lot of people are taking like nerd snipes at each other in the bear market, but he said don't forget to ship too. So I think a lot of people are forgetting. They always ask me, they're always DMing me. I have a secondary inbox of probably like 20 people asking me, when is the bear market going to end? And I always answer, when someone builds something that is so new and so exciting that we onboard a bunch of people and people start buying crypto again and they start using this application. And it honestly is that simple. Like right now, clever folks like yourselves are building things that I think have the potential to ignite a new bull run. And it's really as simple as that. I think you phrased it beautifully. It's kind of like a low opportunity cost, low risk environment to really hunker down and just build something amazing. And we're incredibly excited. I know the Mad Lads are going nuts, and I think everyone in the community is super on board with that long-term vision of yours, which is really rare for a collection that's only been out for a few months. Normally it takes 2 years of like trials and tribulations to get to this point. But I think if Mad Lads have done one thing extraordinarily well, it's to really weed out the short-term thinkers in the group. And everyone that I talk to, they're full believers in your vision, Armani, and they're full believers in the Backpack team as well, which is just excellent. So with that, I mean, this has been an amazing episode. We've hit on Mad Lads, we've hit on marketing, we've hit on the roster, and we've gone into tech. We've talked product, applications, infrastructure, blockchain scalability, networks. We've talked on a lot of different topics. I think it's going to be an amazing episode, but just wanted to thank you for coming on, and also to thank our sponsor Monad for helping put this together.
Thanks, Armani.
Cool. Thanks so much, guys.